A tree cannot make a forest.
This is Dr. Ayodele Odusola, a man of vision, a man of action. He doesn't just talk about development, he lives and breathes it.
When it comes to the issue of development, this is what I see as my major DNA.
As the UNDP resident representative of Zimbabwe, he's at the forefront of shaping the future of not just one nation, but an entire continent. With over 3 decades of experience, Dr. Ayodele has honed his expertise through collaboration with some of the world's most influential organizations. From the IMF to the World Bank, his journey has been one of relentless dedication to the betterment of his continent. But what drives him? Is it personal? Let's find out as we embark on this journey through the life and work of Dr. Ayodele Odusola. Let's not just watch, let's learn, let's be inspired. Because if there is one thing Dr. Ayodele teaches us, it's that change begins with belief. Belief in the power of one individual to ignite a spark that lights the path to a brighter future for all. Africa needs you.
Let me welcome you once again to Channel 63, the network where we discuss issues to do with the future of our continent, the Africa we want. Today we are privileged to be in the office of the UNDP in Zimbabwe, Harare, or Harare, Zimbabwe if you like. And I am so humbled and honored to be having a conversation with the resident representative in the person of Dr. Ayodele Odusola. It is a great honor to be right here, Doc, in your office in Harare. Just give us a gist about your background and how far you have come that I've not mentioned here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tay. It's really a pleasure to really host you and the team. And it's really a privilege to be in Zimbabwe to really address some of the challenging development issues that is facing the entire continent.
Right.
I just want to let you know that apart from the fact that I work for the United Nations Development System, I also worked for the presidency of my country.
Absolutely.
Before joining the United Nations system in 2005. I was with the presidency of my country for almost about 15 years. But before then, I was a lecturer in the Department of Economics of Bafemawolo University, which we usually called in the 80s the second most beautiful university in Africa after University of Alexandria. So, and it's really a pleasure to be with you. But I just want to let you know that when it comes to the issue of development, this is what I see as my major DNA, because it really humbles me to see a continent that is struggling with paradox. The paradox of development, which I always liken Africa to be a man that is sitting on a bullion chair and it is penniless. A bar of bullion alone is talking about $1 billion, not to talk of a chair that you are sitting on and you don't have something to feed yourself. So that's the paradox of Africa. Africa is blessed with human capital and natural resources that we can use to change the dynamics of inclusive growth and development, to dent poverty, to dent inequality and joblessness. Yet, we still have those challenges with us. Then our strategies and policies seems to be wrong. Perhaps it may be issues of leadership, but we need to really get it right. So this is one of the things which I think we need to really put in place because Africa should be the future of development, not the abyss of development.
You know, I listening to you, Doc, I'm wondering whether you're not putting your job on the line. Because most of the time when you talk to diplomats like yourself, especially within the UN sector, they don't talk the way you are talking. I see you talking more as an African than a UN diplomat. So my question is, what are we getting wrong? 60 years of independence, averagely for all African countries. Where are we at where we are now? And let me contextualize that question. Is there hope for Africa with what we have seen so far?
Thank you very much. UNDP is the premier development agency of the United Nations system.
Right.
So you must see things with development lens.
Right.
Diplomat may be looking at the politics of everything, but UNDP as the premier development agency of the United Nations system, we look at the development lens.
Right.
So in this regard, we may have to look at things in a way to turn things around.
Good.
Despite the development challenges confronting Africa as he hopes, I'm still very, very hopeful.
Hopeful.
Very, very hopeful, because I see Africa being the champion of the future of development.
Right.
And if God has created Africa to have some kind of critical mineral resources that other continents are struggling to do, it is not by accident. So what we need to do is to put our houses in order as an Africa, and also as development organization, to see how can we work with Africa to really maximize the benefit of the opportunities they have.
Right.
But in development arena, global development arena, we look at challenges and weaknesses. We're not leveraging on the opportunities available.
Right.
So we need to leverage on the opportunities, particularly if you look at our youth. The most youthful continent in the world is Africa, where you have about 65% of the population below the age of 30. So why don't we leverage that? It's a major instrument. That's the labor of tomorrow for the entire world. So, and in development, if you are in control of your labor, and also you are in control of land, including mineral resources. And don't forget, as indicated in this book, over 60% of uncultivated arable land in the world is resident in Africa.
Right.
These are assets. Why don't we leverage it for development? So I have hope.
I like your optimism, Doc. I mean, you and I have had conversations, and we shall go into some of the publications that you have done. UNDP has been in Africa for only God knows when. Development has been the centerpiece of your agenda. So, what is it that you just said a while ago? We have all the minerals, we have all the things that we should get this continent actually becoming the envy of every other human being on every other human race on the continent. What are we not getting right on the continent?
Thank you very much. A tree cannot make a forest. UNDP is just one of the development partners operating in Africa. And UNDP needs to work with Pan-African institutions under the leadership of the African Union.
Absolutely.
Now, if the leadership get it right, all the partners around it will get it right. And I just want to let you know that many, many parts of the world have strategies for Africa, but Africa does not have strategy for the rest of the world. And if you have it, you do not walk the talk of the strategy. Africa Agenda 2063 is a strategy, but are we walking the talk? That's the key question. And in my local language, we always say, anybody that wants the load to be put on its head must initially attempt to put it first.
Right.
It is not the stranger that will put it on your head. Otherwise, you may be carrying somebody's luggage.
Okay. No, let me hold you there. You see, this program is not only for policymakers. It's viewed by as many young people. Now, you've introduced some concepts, strategy, and all of that. Now, here we are. This is a document. By the way, this is a document talking about the Agenda 2063, which has the UNDP logo, which means UNDP has been an integral partner from the beginning up to the end as far as Agenda 2063 is concerned. And look, every single day there's a conference, there's a summit, there is a workshop going on regarding Agenda 2063. And here you are saying that Africa does not have a strategy for the rest of the world. Could you expatiate on that? Are we just involved in tactical issues alone without a clear strategy to achieve the broader goals?
Thank you very much. The Agenda 2063 and the Sustainable Development Goals are 90% aligned.
Absolutely.
That's in theory.
Sure. That's a theory.
In theory,
Right.
because you have everything there,
Yeah.
but you have to find a way of operationalizing it. Operationalizing it means walking the talk of the alignment. And I always tell my colleagues and fellow development experts that if seminars, conferences, or workshops are instrument of development, Africa will have become a paradise by today.
Interesting.
We've had thousands and even millions of meetings and conferences, but we need to walk the talk. So in this, how do we translate some of these strategies we have into concrete development actions on the ground? That's the missing link. And that's why we need various actors under the leadership of the African Union to really champion this cause of how do we effectively operationalize these strategies. It's not only this. If you look at the African Continental Free Trade area,
Sure.
it's another solid document. But have we really initiated the process of operationalizing it? How can you be talking about Africa Continental Free Trade area where you don't have concrete rule of origin? How can you be talking of African Continental Free Trade area when you don't have what they call compensation mechanism for losers and those that are benefiting from it? And how do you talk about Africa Continental Free Trade area when you have what they call psychological war in Africa, where Africa consumes what it doesn't produce and produces what it doesn't consume? So how do you facilitate that? So these are concrete things we need to really put in place to walk the talk of turning the strategy into concrete actions on the ground.
Yeah, but look, I get a bit confused from the discussion, the way you are going. You are the same guys who give these people the money. I mean, if you take the budget of Africa Continental Free Trade Area, for instance, only 4% of that budget is financed by African countries. 96% are from donors, where UNDP sits at a table with them on all of those things. So when you guys meet, what do you tell the African leaders?
Well, it's very, very clear that you have to really ensure that you invest in your future. Absolutely. If you don't invest in your future, you may be giving opportunity for people to shape your strategy for you. And shape the strategy and the future for you. So in this regard, I think your level of commitment is a function of the resources you are putting into it.
Absolutely.
So if you look at 4% relative to 96% is an indication that you are not committed to the strategy you've put in place. You have to really show that you are heavily committed by putting your resources there so that you can shape this trajectory and the direction of your development. So that's one thing that is really very important. And I really, on the basis of this, I think we need to really find a way of implementing some of the initiatives that have been put in place, particularly President Paul Kagame's report on financing the African Union. And I think we need to really make sure we need to be more inward-looking in terms of generating resources for us to finance our development. Development partners are supposed to be catalytic. They're not supposed to be the core of development driver. So, but if you then reverse the trend, what is supposed to be the catalytic source of funding development to become the core source of funding development, then it might be difficult for you to control the trajectory yourself. So I strongly believe we need to scale up the level of commitment and investment Africa is putting on its own development.
You know, I look at your background and the incredible work that you have done on the continent. For example, in 2019, you launched the Youth Entrepreneurship Action Hub, an initiative that links young entrepreneurs to skills, finance, markets, and seed funding that benefited 28,000 youth on the continent. First of all, Doc, the challenges we know on the continent and all the issues that we have addressed so far in this short conversation, my question to you is, and I must say, I like your optimism. I like the hope that you exhume, and I am even inspired by it. What motivated you to bring about this Youth Entrepreneurship Action Hub? What has been the impact? Have we been able to do some sort of monitoring and evaluation of this project that you've done? and what has been the impact? And how can other young people benefit from this program if it's still ongoing?
Thank you very much. When I was redeployed from New York to South Africa in 2019, and I got to South Africa, I realized about 65% of South African youths are unemployed.
Which is across the continent, anyway.
Which is across the continent. And I see this as a real time bomb. Then when it explodes, it consumes all of us.
Can you go deeper into that? Because you see, from the lens you wear as a development expert is much thicker than the average African they will look at. So when you say, and I'm asking this question because not many African politicians and African policymakers really appreciate the fact that the youth challenges, particularly unemployment, is a time bomb. So can you explain to us in detail, why do you say it's a time bomb?
It is a time bomb because if you don't employ your youth, they will employ themselves.
Absolutely.
And when they employ themselves, they take advantages of the loopholes in the system.
Good.
Instead of becoming an engine of productivity, they become the engine of social vices. Not only in terms of armed robbery, kidnapping, and a lot of other issues that impinges on development. And that's why unless we do something that we effectively and efficiently utilize the energy of our youth into production and productivity-based activities, we're likely to really force them to use it on counterproductive initiatives. Absolutely. And that's why, if you look at most countries where you have conflict all over in Africa, the core of the people, of the actors are the youth.
Absolutely.
Because you are not engaging them productively. They have to create an opportunity for them to be employed. And don't forget, the cliche, not only in Africa, everywhere in the world, that an idle hand
the devil finds work for the idle hand.
Is the workshop of the devil.
Absolutely.
So, and we have to avoid that.
Yeah.
So in that regard, that's one of the things that led me to creating what they call a Youth Entrepreneurship Action Hub.
Right.
Youth Entrepreneurship Action Hub was for South Africa.
Only?
Yes, it was for South Africa.
Right.
The 28,000 youth we're talking about, these are South Africans.
Interesting.
Yes. It was created to really find an opportunity where we look at how do we really promote small-scale enterprises, because it's a major missing link in Africa.
Absolutely.
When I got to South Africa in 2019, the first what they call the business report from the Statistics South Africa really shows that about 70% of micro and small-scale enterprises die before they reach their 50th anniversary. And I then said, what can we do to really address this issue? Now, one of the things we did was that particular initiative, which we roll out nationally, where we recruited South African youths to say, okay, the idea is for you to really hone yourself in terms of entrepreneurship skill and expertise, but also to be able to address the challenge of accessing market.
Right.
I mean, finance and market.
Markets, yeah.
So it's a triple strategy, a 3-in-1 strategy, where we get what they call young South Africa entrepreneurs, train them for a period of about 6 months, and in the period of training them, we expose them to having access to bank managers for them to pitch their businesses. And at the same time, we link them to markets, both local and international markets. So, because at this stage, you'll be able to have access to finance because, and at the end of the 6-month program, as we give you the certificate, the pitch which we have put in your own project proposal is the amount of resources we give to you to start your business.
Interesting.
So we use the program to address 3 different challenges that face young entrepreneurs: entrepreneurship skill, access to finance, and access to market. And shortly after we launched it, about 2 of them got what they call the Global Award. So to really show the dynamism in the training. So this is one of the things we did. And there's so many other things relating to the issue of youth Also, we launched what they call the renewable energy technology technicians, the first in South Africa, where we partnership with the South African Renewable Technology Center called Saratech in Pretoria, in Cape Town. The idea is for them where we were able to train young and talented South Africans to be able to manufacture and fabricate what they call wind energy equipment and be able to repair them.
Interesting.
And we had 2 cohorts. But I just want to let you know that by the time we completed the first cohort, all of them got job before they finished their internship. 6 months of core training and 3 months of internship. All of them got. In fact, there was a case where about 3 ladies were competing with 4 different companies to pick them. So this is really one of the opportunities which we thought it's good for us to really find a way of creating opportunities of empowering our youth.
So Doc, was it just an initiative for South Africa, or is this something that can be leveraged across continent?
It can be leveraged across the continent. But I just want to also let you know that there is a regional initiative that UNDP put in place, which we call the Youth Connect.
Yeah, Youth Connect, yes.
We started in Rwanda in 2013.
Right.
And today, we have it across all the sub-Saharan African countries.
Right.
And the idea is for us to create a kind of platform for the youth to come together and address their own problems themselves. And this is part of the things we use to promote not only talking to each other to find solutions to perennial problems, but also we use it to create opportunity for them to go through mentorship and benchmarking initiative so that they know that the reality of getting yourself empowered can be done within your peers.
Okay.
So it is peer mentorship, which we use this one for, which is spearheaded by United Nations Development Program across all sub-Saharan African countries. So this is one of the initiatives that has been quite solid, and we've been supporting it on a regular basis. And there's hardly any country that doesn't have a kind of footprint of these this initiative. And we strongly believe if we invest heavily in it, with African Union joining hands, I think the future will be quite bright.
No, I mean, you are right. Yes, last year, December, we were part of the Youth Connect in Nairobi.
Yes.
And even though I have my personal reservations about the implementation, because I think that the huge number of young people who were there, almost about 20,000, in terms of quantity is good, but quality, we need to review that program. You mentioned mentorship and all of that. The question is, what opportunity do these young people at that big forum have to create that mentorship, even the linkages and all of that? But that's something we can discuss later at another forum, because I was there personally. Now, but the issue, I mean, Doc, you've done such wonderful work in your development program. Tell us a bit about the Tax Inspectors Without Borders project that you launched in, I think, 2016. And you see all the things you are doing dovetails into the objectives of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which we shall discuss later. But tell us a bit about the tax. And my interest about this Tax Inspectors Without Borders issue is developing SMEs on the continent. One of the things we've mentioned at a forum in the African Union Commission in Addis, I asked the question, is it not possible, for example, when these foreign companies come to Africa, we give them tax incentives? And yet on the continent, our own entrepreneurs, SMEs, women and young people, don't enjoy anything as incentive, tax incentive. So tell us a bit about your Tax Inspectors Without Borders project, and let's see how that was also accomplished.
Thank you very much. The Tax Inspector Without Borders was launched in 2015 at the margins of the Financing for Development Conference in Addis Ababa, which I was part of.
Good.
And we have initiated it in Africa and many other developing countries, where we have been able to contribute up to about 2 billion in increased additional revenues by revenue authorities across countries, and of which about 1.8 billion is in Africa. The initiative is a kind of partnership between the United Nations Development Program and OECD, which we have put together in getting what we call tax experts and auditors, accountants all over the world that have retired in multinational companies.
Sure.
The tax inspector without border was directed at blocking the loopholes in most of the multinational companies, particularly in the mining sector, to avoid what they call tax evasion and tax avoidance. So what we did was to hire retired tax experts from most multilateral companies and then say, okay, we go to a particular country, identify some of the loopholes and block it work with the government to block it. This is how it has been able to generate additional revenues of about 2 billion since its creation.
Interesting.
And it has covered many African countries. What we now do, particularly in South Africa and here, we have initiated the process of creating what they call a forensic laboratory on tax crime, where we'll be able to look at the details, deep dive into what is causing it and how do we block it. This is one of the initiatives we're trying to really address. Essentially, the tax inspector without border is what we are trying to really promote in deeper form. We're trying to link up with ATAF, this African Tax Administrators Forum, based in Pretoria, where we want to bring some of the big tax authorities in Africa together to partner with countries with small tax authorities and develop capacities on the basis of their areas of comparative advantage. We have, if you look at it, when it comes to revenue generation and tax authority, South African Tax Authority is one of the best in the world. It's one of the best in the world in terms of its advancement and sophistication. And also when it comes to the issue of using electronic tax-based system, Nairobi, Kenya is one of them. The tax authority in Kenya is really good.
Pushing the IT project.
Yes, so there are a number of them across all the countries. We've identified them. Good. And we then say, how can we pair this with other countries so that they can learn together and then move things together as part of the South-South cooperation within Africa. This is one of the initiatives where we're trying to see how we can do this to really enhance capacity. And we are currently working with the African Capacity Building Foundation that is based here.
Oh, good.
In terms of promoting their ability to build the capacity of African government to increase domestic resource mobilization.
Wonderful.
So we're currently supporting them. UNDP is supporting them to do this. So, and we have a number of other initiatives which I think is really going in place. And I just want to underscore the fact that if you hear about African Mineral Development Center today and the African Mining Vision, UNDP worked extensively with other Pan-African institutions, African Union, UN Economic Commission for Africa, and African Development Bank to establish them.
Absolutely.
So we played very strong role in putting them in place.
Good.
Now, on the other issue you mentioned, which is more or less one of the things that I'm currently working on, where multinational companies that have capacity to pay taxes are given undue tax incentives. Tax holidays.
Sometimes 15 years.
Yes. Whereas the small and micro enterprises that really break even are burdened with a lot of tax obligations.
Sometimes their shops and all those are closed.
Yes, are closed. Their goods are seized.
Yeah.
So this is where one of the fiscal paradoxes we have. And we've been trying to say, how do we really address it? And we're focusing on what we call tax expenditures. Tax expenditure is a kind of, is putting all the tax incentives and tax holidays you've given to big companies. Instead of generating revenue, it becomes an expenditure for government. Yeah. So we then say, no, how do we block it? Because most of these are very unproductive. If you look at the linkage between tax expenditure and the industrialization, you then realize that there may not be any serious correlation. That shows it's a waste. It's a wasted effort. So why don't you enhance the productivity of small-scale enterprises and enhance the kind of incentives that allow them to access market, that will allow them to have what they call financial incentives in terms of access. They are not even asking for subsidies. They are not asking for tax relief, but facilitate the process for them to be gainfully involved in the financial system. That's what they are looking for at a moderate tax, what they call credit rates. Now, in many African countries, you then realize that lending rate is within 20 to 30%.
Absolutely.
Now, how many companies can make internal rate of return of 15%? So many of you are working for the banks.
Absolutely.
If you have access to it. Yeah. So this is one of the things we have to really make sure we manage effectively to be able to manage this. Now, there are a number of other things which I always put forward. UNDP is currently supporting a global project on what they call informal economy transformation.
Sure.
When I was in South Africa, we pioneered it in 6 countries, 4 in Africa and 2 outside Africa, 1 in Haiti, as well as in Solomon Island. Outside Africa, you have Sierra Leone, Mozambique, Sudan, and Central African Republic in Africa. The idea is for us to really see what do we need to put in place to transform the informal sector.
Absolutely.
Transformation of the informal sector is what we are really going for, so that you capacitate them to become an engine of production. And one of the things also we put it that UNDP is doing in Africa to support the small and medium enterprises is what they call supply development program, which we have initiated in many countries, South Africa and Kenya. The idea is, how do we ensure that the small and medium enterprises are not left out in some of these business activities with the public sector? For instance, if a contract of, say, $1 billion is given to a multinational company to construct roads, what we're saying, particularly one of the good countries that has done it very well is Kenya, where about 30% of that particular contract must go to small-scale enterprises. Do the pavement, do the gutters, lining the roads.
Right.
These are things that can be done by small-scale enterprises by building their capacity and facilitating their access to new jobs. So these are the kind of things we do to really promote small-scale enterprise development. And there are a number of other initiatives we are doing at countries, whether it's through incubation centers, whether it's through what they call technology labs, which we always create to support small-scale enterprises to really push for productivity enhancement and for them to become sustainable enterprises.
No doubt about that you guys are doing a lot. Now, my question is, do you also address the soft aspect of these skills, the attitude of the young people? Doing pavement and all of that. I mean, it's amazing. The average young entrepreneur in Africa, it seems to be present-minded rather than tomorrow. So does the program address some of these as well?
That's one of the issues we do, but it cannot be done by an institution alone. It has to be done collectively. Wonderful. And that's why I love your idea of really looking at the mindset. Right. Like I told you, one of the things we've had, and particularly in the book on Africa's agricultural renaissance, from Paradox to Powerhouse, one of the issues we're talking about is how do we empower the youth? First, to see agriculture as an enterprise, not a way of life.
Absolutely. We'll come to that.
Yes.
Because I know you've done extensive work on agriculture as well.
Yes. This is one of the things we said we need to address the change of mind.
Absolutely.
The mindset of not only our politicians, but our youth. Because our youth are not interested in what is investment that will yield dividend in the future. They are looking for something contemporaneously, something they can do and get things today. Yeah. But in most cases, things that yield instantaneous revenue, they are only short-term phenomena.
Absolutely.
They do not give you long-term revenue that can make you a sustainable business. So that's why we have to really work a lot to work on the mindset of our people, especially the young people in Africa, the young Africans. We need to really make sure that investment in education, and soft and hard skills, is what will really, really transform Africa. Now, my view is this. I want an African future that is training engineers today. If you want to call yourself a civil engineer, electrical engineer, or any form of engineer, you must be able to roll up your sleeves, knot the boat, tie the boat, and making sure you are able to deal with the practical element of it. That's why I want to see we need to promote the linkage between our formal training system and the informal training system. Because the informal training system is anchored on practicality, whereas the formal training system is focusing more on certification.
Absolutely.
So they need to link the two so that our people become well-grounded. And I think that's the future of investment I want in our future so that they can become the embodiment of productivity of tomorrow.
If I get you right, I guess you are trying to say that we should also ensure that our TVET system is more enhanced and capacitated as well.
Yes.
So that, this idea of everybody thinking that I need to do white-collar job and all of those things, we can. Doc, 3 key pillars which has informed our discussion today: the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, Agenda 2063, and the youth. Now, let's take them one by one, and let's start off with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Now, UNDP, as I mentioned earlier on, has been there from the beginning up to the end. I mean, not up to the end, up to now.
To now.
From where you sit, is Africa integrating or disintegrating?
That's a very tall order. Very challenging question. Is the world integrating? That's the question, because looking at the kind of crisis, conflict we have all over.
Absolutely.
And looking at the rising trend of nationalism across the world, we can say we're deglobalizing.
Right.
And once the world is heavily affected by that, every constituent part of the world is equally affected.
Right.
So that's that's the starting point.
But Doc, I mean, if you look at, yes, we can talk about the global level, but now Africa, with a clear intention of creating a regional bloc for us. Here you are, the ECOWAS, for example, just finished their 37th or so meeting.
Yes.
Niger, Burkina, Mali, all those countries were absent from the meeting. Now, there was a threat that they were even not going to allow goods coming from other ECOWAS countries into their region. Now, so are we going forward? Are we at a standstill? Are we not being bold enough in addressing some of the critical issues that would advance the ideals of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area? Or are we just pretending like ostriches?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. The practicality of integration is one of the challenges we are really grappling with. Now, you can't be talking about integration while the constituent part is disintegrating.
Absolutely.
That's the starting point.
Sure.
And that's why I want to use the opportunity to call on the African leaders to apply wisdom.
That's your camera.
Yes, to apply wisdom. We need to really apply wisdom in the sense that because in our local, my local language, once you say this firewood is not good, you keep on removing them from the fire spot. At the end, there will not be fire left in the fire spot.
Absolutely.
So to avoid that, we need to really find a way of accommodating and then listen to every constituent part. Because when there is smoke, there is fire somewhere.
Absolutely.
And we should not really block our mind to the extent that we don't want to listen to those that are agitating for change. Change is the only inevitable thing in human life.
Sure.
So I strongly believe that the idea of having Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali pulling out of ECOWAS is an unfortunate thing.
Very.
And we have to apply wisdom. And this is why I strongly believe we need to listen not only to the political leadership, but our traditional institutions' leadership, because they have very strong role in bringing these people together.
Absolutely.
And we cannot say there's full-fledged ECOWAS when those ones are saying we are pulling out.
Absolutely.
So, and I strongly believe we need to listen to them and then reach a kind of consensus on how to lift the region forward. Because this is something that, don't think it's purely a political problem.
No, it's not.
It has economic ramifications.
Absolutely. And even social.
And social ramifications. So we have to look at it from a development lens.
Sure.
And we need to really make sure we bring them together. But in terms of the African Continental Free Trade Area, I think we need to really roll up our sleeves and be more pragmatic in dealing with it. If you do not have adequate rule of origin that says at least 75% of those goods must be produced in Africa locally, where the 25 can come from outside.
Right.
If you don't have that rule of origin, it will be a child's play.
Absolutely.
2, we have to ensure that there is what we call compensation mechanism. Because in free trade area, there are losers and there are gainers and winners. So if you don't accommodate the loss of the losers, they will stop it.
Absolutely.
And I know most of the big economies, they're thinking about how do we really address the possibility of losing out. So that's why the issue of compensatory mechanism becomes very practical, and it's a major instrument of operationalizing continental free trade area.
But what you said, look, why are we not? Oh, of course, Africa is not too old on the block. But if we don't start addressing these issues from the start, how are we going to make progress? So, what is stopping us from addressing some of these teething problems?
Well, that's why one of the reasons why we are really trying to see how we can start on a very good footing.
Right.
Because the way we are going, we're focusing more on the euphoria of signing that agreement. But we are not thinking about how do we effectively operationalize it. Sure. And that's why, as a development expert, I think about how do we operationalize it. And those are the kind of thing we need to focus more attention on.
Right.
And like I said earlier on, we need to really think about mindset of Africans. Yeah, anywhere you go to, whether north or south, east or west, or even central, we have penchants for goods and services that come from outside the continent.
Sure.
And we look down on goods and services that are produced within Africa as inferior items. No country or continent does that and succeed.
Yeah.
So we need to change that mind, where locally produced items is really, really advocated for. And that's why also we are preaching for the opportunity for us to invest heavily on making sure we change the mindset of Africans so that they start producing what they consume and start consuming what they
produce on the continent. What about the issue of free movement of people and rest of residents?
That's one of the teething problems, a major implementation challenge for African continental free trade area. Because the way it is, you go to many African countries, one, the fees that most African countries pay before they enter another country within Africa is quite too high.
Right.
In fact, when you compare it to what travelers from non-African countries pay when they enter such African countries, the gap is wide.
Yeah.
So it's one of the antitheses of this Africa continental free trade area. Now, that's one thing. And also, if you look at, the policy for establishing businesses in other African countries, we are having polarized system of industrialization, which is not good for free trade area. One, we need to really think about the fact that if I am a Ghanaian, I establish a small-scale enterprises in Ghana. If I want to go to South Africa, if I want to go to Mauritius, if I want to go to Kenya, I do not need to register. Right. So we need to go into electronic registration system that once it's done in one country, you don't need to repeat in another country. Right. So that's one of the things we are currently working with the Secretariat of AFCTA in terms of making sure we use regulation as a stimulus for trade facilitation.
Because I was going to ask you, how can we leverage on technology, for example, within the context of Africa Continental Free Trade and then job creation? And I know you've done quite a bit of work on that. Do you want to talk about that as well?
Yeah, this is one of the things that the United Nations Development Program is doing, not only in Africa, across the world. In 2019, the UNDP administrator launched what they call Accelerator Lab in 99 countries, but it's now over 100 countries now, all over the world. And the idea is for us to really focus on innovation so that we'll be Africa as a continent will be able to catch up with what they call the digital order, which is the next global order. And in this regard, we focus more on digitalization. Particularly the one we launched in South Africa, we were focusing on what they call rural innovation.
Right.
Because there's so many innovation in our rural communities that we do not codify and document.
Right.
And they are very, very solid for transformation. The idea is as UNDP, we're not focusing on digital innovation alone, but we are focusing on non-digital innovation.
Absolutely.
Things that are done efficiently and effectively for better results. Right. So these are the kind of things we're really trying to see. How can we push this? And I strongly believe that if we do it very well, it will help us a lot in accelerating the implementation of African Continental Free Trade Area. And it will also help us to really change the mindset of our African youth in terms of what do we need to do to really accelerate growth and development. And that's why I strongly believe, based on the partnership UNDP has been having with many African countries, where we do what they call innovation labs, technology labs, and where we partner with government to really see how we can meaningfully engage our African youth to be productive using the technology as an instrument of transformation.
Interesting. If you have just joined us in this program, we're talking to Dr. Ayodele Odusola, the resident representative of the UNDP in Harare, Zimbabwe. Now, Doc, I'm holding in my hands here a very interesting publication that you have done. Africa's Agricultural Renaissance, from Paradox to Powerhouse. Now, I tried to go online to get the publication to read. Unfortunately, I couldn't because you have to pay for it and all of that. Now, two things I want to ask you. What do you mean by Africa's Agricultural Renaissance? That's number one. Number two, and I like the choice of word you used, the paradox. My question is, Africa has the most arable lands, and at the same time, our youth are unemployed. Why haven't we been able to leverage agriculture to create a lot of jobs on the continent? Because now we don't talk of agriculture in the traditional sense of just, bow and... there are a lot of, value additions that come from agriculture. Why are we still talking about unemployment on our continent? Why are we not able to feed ourselves and even export to the rest of the world? From your research, what is the problem?
Thank you very much. What do we mean by Africa's agricultural renaissance?
Yes.
Is going back to the root.
Good.
Going back to the root where we can use agriculture to shape development trajectory of the continent. And there is room for all countries, whether you are a least developed countries, whether you are middle income country, whether you are an upper income country, there are opportunities.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things that we preach there, for instance, for least developed countries, is we have focused too much attention on what we call monoproduct agriculture that destroy what you call traditional crop system that are very rich in nutrition. Now, everybody is focusing on cash crops. Is that corn, wheat, rice, cocoa, whereas there's some nutritious traditional agricultural system that we have destroyed completely.
Absolutely.
Now, what we're saying is that if you look at most African countries, they just specialize on one, whereas the soil texture can go for 3, 4, 5 different crops. Why don't we diversify? Because if you diversify your crops, the terms of trade cannot be for 4 crops at the same time.
Absolutely.
So that's why, because we focus on one, you then realize that once the terms of trade is against that particular commodity, then you are on the drop.
And even when the weather changes.
Yes, when the weather changes.
Absolutely.
Whereas our crops, there's some that can withstand so many weather situations. So these are the kind of things we need to say, okay, diversification of crops.
Right.
The second level is what we call value addition to agricultural products. If you look at what we have in this book, we said if you are able to do forward and backward integration into the African agricultural system, the kind of what you call asset, we are sitting on 3.7 trillion assets in agricultural sector alone. And how much do we add to it? Almost next to nothing. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Because any country that specializes in exporting primary commodities is exporting its jobs, it's exporting its wealth creation, and exporting its future.
Absolutely.
So that's the kind of thing a message we're passing across. We need to really make sure we turn agriculture into an enterprise rather than a way of life.
Right.
The way of life is the kind of agriculture where, my grandfather did it, my father did it, I will do it. You are doing it because you have to make a difference. And that's why in the book, we are talking about commercialization of agriculture, where a farmer, instead of only selling 5% of its produce and consuming 95%, we want to turn it around.
Yeah.
Sell 95% of your produce and consume less than 5%. If you increase productivity of your farm, this will be excellent.
Right.
That's the kind of commercialization we're talking about. Ethiopia was able to do it before the conflict started, where they agreed within 5 years, they are going to train about 5 million farmers into commercial farming. And the first 3 years, they succeeded in training over 3.5 million farmers into commercial agriculture. That means Africa can do it. Morocco is also doing what we call Green Morocco Plan, where they do what they call aggregator principle, where they do contract farming. They attach 100 to 200, 50 to 100 farmers to one aggregator. Aggregator is somebody, a company, that uses the input of the farmers, but they produce, they give them finances in advance,
and
they give them technical
seeds.
Support and seeds.
Yeah.
And then the agreement is that once the produce is harvested, it has to go to them as first priority. So those are the kind of things they are doing in Ethiopia, in both Ethiopia as well as Morocco, that is really transforming agriculture.
Yeah.
And then when you talk about value addition too, Ghana has started adding value to cocoa. And if you look at it, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Nigeria, there's what they call the melting pot of cocoa production in the world.
Yeah.
So in that regard, leveraging that opportunity provides opportunity for us to use agriculture and as an instrument of development. Inclusive development, because it helps to dent poverty, inequality, and joblessness. But we must find a way of eliciting the interest of African youth to go into agriculture.
That is where I was coming to.
We must ensure the system is fully transformed.
Absolutely.
We cannot depend on the hoes and cutlasses and we say we want to use agriculture as an enterprise. We have to invest heavily, not only in terms of what they call equipment that needs to be used by this youth. We need to train them and we make sure we connect them to market and finance.
Absolutely.
It's really very important. And that's why UNDP is working with a number of African countries on what we call agricultural corridors. Agricultural corridors where you identify a zone where you bring thousands of you to go to that place, and in that place there's market for equipment. There's market for equipment, there's market for products, and there's bank in that particular facility. Good. You produce all the necessary input that is needed, and then you allow them to cluster, and then you provide what they call the technical assistance through the extension services that have been used. Ethiopia is one of the best in the world in extension services, and if we invest heavily there, we need to do this. What I realized across that is that if you go to many African countries, for the past 10, 15 years, they've not replaced retired extension services. And they are not even subjected to the new tools in innovation. And Africa should be talking about precision agriculture.
Absolutely.
And that's the way to go. Absolutely. And we have a lot of examples and case studies in the book which help us to show how can we support African youth to become entrepreneurs by themselves. The Songa initiative in Porto Novo in Benin is one of the trailblazer when it comes to innovation. It's really good. And we need to really say, how do we support institutions like that in Africa to really create what we call institution that will be able to drive agricultural transformation and development?
I haven't had a time to look at the book, the publication yet, but I hope that the issue of land, access to land, has also been addressed in this book. Because in Africa, largely most of our lands are traditionally owned. And if it's not owned, access to the land is extremely expensive.
Yes.
How do we make all these things attractive to the youth? And then also the whole packaging of agriculture. If you tell somebody, what are you studying in the university? You say, I'm studying agriculture. And the first thing is almost like say, I'm studying mechanic, and all of that. And yet you and I know that it's the future of the world. So how do we package these things to make it more attractive to the young people? Now, and I'm asking this question, which I want to link it to our next item, which would be probably one of the major things with Agenda 2063. How do we ensure that primarily our young people are well equipped, well positioned to make Agenda 2063 indeed the Africa that we want. Because look, you and I know that Africa has almost everything in terms of policies, in terms of the ideas and all of that. The challenge is implementation. So, and knowing that majority of us on the continent are young people, how do we address these things? So if you can address these two areas for us.
Thank you very much. When it comes to the issue of agriculture and Agenda 2063, if you look at the first aspiration,
Yes.
a prosperous Africa,
Yes.
the main instrument of achieving this is agriculture and industrialization. And the fact that agriculture is the major instrument of propelling industrialization, which Ethiopia and Malawi have done in the past with great success, which we call agriculture-led industrialization. So it's one of the things we have to leverage and then see how we can use it to transform development. Then in terms of packaging agriculture in a way that will be very attractive to African youth, and this is one of the missing link.
Right.
But there are a number of institutions that are trying to do this. African Development Bank is trying to support specific training for young Africans to be fully engaged in agriculture. But I strongly believe one of the initiatives we need to really put in place, as was done under the Anchor program in Nigeria for agricultural program, is that our central banks must pick up their development lens and responsibility, because you need agricultural guarantee scheme that is efficiently run, that can promote the kind of financial incentive for our youth to be involved in agricultural transformation. That's the first thing in terms of that, because the kind of market rate of interest discourages youth. They cannot even access it. That's number one. And also we need to really look at our land tenure system, where most of the system is traditionally run, and in few countries they are individually run. But how do we make sure they have access to land? Many countries have done it in the past. We have case studies of India, China, and South Korea, and Taiwan in that particular bowl. And one of the things we are pushing across is how do we make it accessible? Ethiopia has initiated something about land registration system in the past, and it's really worked. Can we do similar things like that? And we know there are a number of countries that are trying to do that, because without, investing, once you know the landlord will push you out or increase the rate, after 1 or 2 years, you don't invest in such land. And if you don't invest in such land, it doesn't increase the productivity of the land. So that's why many of our farms do not have irrigation system. So I strongly believe we need to invest heavily on irrigation system. The beauty of it in Africa is that we have so many vegetations that can, survive across all seasons. But we are not exploring it because everything is rain-fed agriculture. Only about 6% of agricultural land is irrigated in Africa, whereas the average is quite huge in other continents. This is one of the areas we need to really invest heavily on to really ensure that we have all-year farming, and then we'll be able to supply agricultural products to the rest of the world. So that's one of the things which I think is really very important. Now, we also need to really ensure that we introduce local content policy in agricultural products. Because at times we focus more on farm gate activities. We do not focus on post-farm gate activities. Post-farm gate activities is when you add values to those. Because if you add 1% value to agricultural products, it increases the price by at least 10%. So see what you're losing. So we need to invest heavily on value chain development in agricultural products. And this is one of the things which I think we are not doing in Africa. We need to really see how do we work together with various institutions. And one of the things we are pushing is for us to create what we call Green Revolution Bank that will be focusing on agriculture. I know African Union has initiated a lot in the past, especially under CADEP. making sure that agricultural productivity is a minimum of 6%, and also increase research and development in agriculture to a minimum of about 1%. So there are so many things.
Right.
But we need to really make sure we put our resources together to finance green revolution.
Interesting.
So this is one of the areas, and I particularly say if the donor community can say about 10% of ODA can be directed to promoting agriculture. Yes, agricultural financing. I think it will be a major leap in the development frontier.
I like the idea of the ODAs, but would that work? Knowing that a lot of these, things will go to undermine the sort of interests that the developmenters have.
Yeah, but
importation of rice and all this sugar and all these things.
Well, the thing is, if it's managed at multilateral level by African Union or African Development Bank or any other one, I think it will work. But if it goes to individual country, that's where it becomes easier complex to manage. So I strongly believe a multilateral approach to that particular funding system will help us to really move.
Talking about individual countries, and Doc, now African Union is now at the G21. Being a member of G20, whatever. And still we see our African countries negotiating, doing bilateral discussions with all our development partners. How do we address this issue? And link that to the whole concept of the African Union Commission and agenda. How does that work?
Well, that's one of the things that I said earlier on, that the rest of the world has a strategy for Africa. But Africa doesn't have for the rest of the world.
It's enough. It's enough. Doc, we live in a continent where about 99% of the people are religious. They either go to church or they go to the mosque. And yet when it comes to continental policy discourses, faith-based institutions are literally absent. Do you agree to the school of thought that it may be talking about Agenda 2063, the aspirations to do with peace and security, and most of these things can be championed by faith-based institutions? Is it about time we involve them adequately in the discourses at the policy level?
Thank you very much. We always say in Africa that you don't shave people's head in their absence.
Absolutely.
Because the closest leaders to Africans are the faith-based institutions, not even the politicians.
Absolutely.
So now, if you are discussing about them without them, then you are discussing for yourself, not the future.
Right.
So I strongly believe that that is one of the missing links, because we have excluded our traditional institutions from the development discourse.
Right.
And we have to go back to that. And I strongly believe it's one of the opportunities we have to transform development. Because one of the things we do not even appreciate is that the people on the ground listens to their traditional rulers, faith-based organizations, than they listen to any politician anywhere, no matter how strong you are. So in that regard, I strongly believe we need to factor them into the development equation. And that's why we need to ensure that the faith-based institutions need to be fully integrated into the development discourse. And one of the things is that in the past, they used to be the moral compass of the society. Sure. So if you see why there is moral decadence now might be a reflection of their absence in their discussion, the development discussion. Yeah. And I strongly believe we need to bring that moral compass into the development equation. Absolutely. Because without that, we won't be able to preach to the psychology of the people, the mindset of the people in terms of what we need to do correctly. Yeah, and I strongly believe it is high time we brought them into the development discussion. We should not exclude them because they are the closest leaders to the people on the ground. Absolutely. And once you want to harvest ideas, the best thing is to listen to those that the people listen to.
I like the angle from which you have brought it, in the fact that you cannot shave somebody, with his absence. Now, take for example the issue of corruption. Corruption is not, you cannot legislate corruption out of any system. It's a moral thing. And that can only best be advocated and preached about by the traditional leaders and faith-based. Now, I know you are an expert of development and you've been in UNDP and UN system for a long time. Can we get your commitment that supposing we came up with some sort of, program that would seek to capacitate faith-based leaders, and we want to approach UNDP, would we have your support in this perspective?
Well, UNDP, whatever instrument of transformation for development, is always one of the things we preach for.
Wonderful.
The role of UNESCO becomes critical in this particular. So it's another United Nations organization we need to listen to when it comes to achieving faith-based organizations, and also looking at the fifth aspirations, a strong cultural identity.
Absolutely.
And it goes beyond culture because it's part of social, religious, everything, and faith-based institutions. Right. We strongly believe that, the principle of the Sustainable Development Program is leave no one behind.
Absolutely.
So anything that tries to bring everybody together for development agenda, United Nations system embraces.
Wonderful.
So that's the kind of thing. And we're at any point in time is to promote inclusion.
Absolutely.
So including that major important stakeholder in the development discourse is one thing that the UN organizations will always push for.
Dr. Ayodele, you and I have had discussions since we met. And by the way, we met for the first time. And if I say that I'm not impressed, not just apart from what I've read about you, but meeting you in person and your dynamism, your aspirations, and above all, your optimism about the future of this continent is amazing. And I must commend you for that. Now, it is said that what lasts most is not the monies we put in our banks and what have you, but the legacies we leave behind. My last but one question for you is this. You've seen it all when it comes to development. And like you said, you've been at the presidency of Nigeria for more than a decade and all of that. What would you want to leave behind? You just came from South Africa. And I'm sure from South Africa, people are talking about you and all of that. If you were to leave the UN system today, how would you want you to be remembered? Your secretary, your PA, and all of those people, all the people that you've interacted with across board, how would you want them to remember Dr. Odusola as the person that they interacted with?
Thank you very much. The legacy I wish to leave behind is transforming lives. It may not be in quantity, but in quality. When you wake up every day, how many people do you want to add to their life? That's one thing that is really very important. Like you rightly said, it's not about the resources you put there, but the commitment you're able to put there to change the mindset of people for productive engagement. And that's why anywhere I go to, I try to focus on empowering the youth. And the best way to do that is to focus on skill and entrepreneurship development for our youth. Like we said, an idle hand is the devil's workshop. Sure. We have to make sure we dislodge devil from using them as workshop by engaging them productively. So, one of the things that I have in terms of the legacy I want to leave behind is that we should not be using our youth as being monolithic. Because we always think, give them skills and every problem will be resolved. That is not the issue. Right. Because there are different types of skills. Only 10%, between 5 and 10% of our youths have entrepreneurship skill. Sure. So, if you say you want to give 100% youth entrepreneurship skill, you are just wasting resources. Right. So what you need to do, the 5 to 10% that have entrepreneurship capability, why can't you grow them? Right. That's first. Right. Now, there's another 40 to 50% that believe that they need skill to occupy and engage themselves. Right. The artisans. Right. The TVET college you mentioned. Absolutely. Now, this is where you focus on skill development, both soft and hard skill. Now, this is the kind of legacy that segment needs to be capacitated to be able to employ themselves and then become employers of labor later. The last segment of our youth, which I call the third angle, is those people that believe they cannot be entrepreneurs and they believe they cannot be artisans, they cannot even work, be their own employer, but they want to work for others. But we need to give them employability skills. So these are the three elements, because at times the mistake we make in development arena is that we think a generic thing where one skill solves all the problem. So we have to look at it on the basis of the needs of the youth. So transforming lives is a legacy that I wish to leave behind, and also making sure our youths are effectively empowered, engaged to meet the future.
Thank you. I think we'll need to come back again and do a second leg of this. We have not talked about education. We've not talked about social enterprises. Your own background is a whole centerpiece that needs to be looked at. So we'll come back. But this is your camera, Doc. Agenda 2063, the future we want, the Africa we want, largely going to be driven by policymakers and the youth. You have close to 2 billion people on our continent. What are your final thoughts, particularly for policymakers, development partners, our youth? What are your final thoughts?
Thank you very much. Agenda 2063 has identified 7 different aspirations. My final thought is for policymakers across all the African countries to look at how they can meaningfully contribute to that process. When we're talking about a prosperous Africa, how are we contributing to a prosperous Africa? I think that's one thing we talk about. If you talk about an integrated Africa, both politically and in all dimensions, how are we bringing this one together so that we avoid a situation that is happening in West Africa, where 3 countries say, we don't want to be part of you. So how do we contribute to becoming an integrated Africa? So these are series of other aspirations. These are aspirations that are genuine in their intention, but unless we are committed to their implementation, they become theory. So my advice to policymakers across all countries is to identify those ones that they have comparative advantage on, because you can't say you want to implement the 7 aspirations simultaneously. And that's where we get it wrong.
Right.
Take 2 to 3 of them and be committed to it. But for you to do that, you must mainstream it in your national development plan. And from your national development plan, you must operationalize it through budgetary allocations on an annual basis. If you're able to do this, I strongly believe the future will be just at our stepstone that we can easily move towards. And also, it is important for all African governments, policymakers, even the private sector, to prioritize empowering our youth. That is the leader of tomorrow, is the manager of the future. And once you are deciding about African youth without the youth being fully involved, they always say, not for us if you are not included. So I strongly believe that they should be consulted in anything that affects them. And I want to encourage all African presidents to ensure that at least 25% of our top level leaders are youth, because we need to really, really groom them for future. Ministers, they need to really bring on board youth as part of our current leaders to shape the dynamics of our future development pathway. So this is the way to go, and I strongly believe this is one of the things we need to really, really promote to achieve Agenda 2063. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been Channel 63, and we've been coming to you live from the Harare office of the UNDP. And for the last couple of minutes, I've been speaking to Dr. Ayodele Odusola. By the way, Dr. Ayodele is popularly known as Dr. Ayo. He prefers to be called Dr. Ayo. by all his colleagues. It's been an interesting conversation. And what I want you guys to do for us is this. Give us your feedback. If there's any burning topic in your heart that you really want us to address, as we go around the continent talking to our policymakers, talking to our leaders, let us know the topic that you want us to ask, the questions that you want us to ask from them. But like Dr. Ayo said, the future is for all of us. And the Africa we want can never become the Africa we want if all of us don't put in all our effort. So he said, let's roll up our sleeves and put in our best. And if we do that, then indeed, the continent that we want it to be, we shall indeed get it. Dr. Ayo, it's been a wonderful time speaking with you. And as I mentioned, we'll come back again to do a second piece of this thing.
Africa needs you.